Record live on this. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Your favorite cryptocurrency astrologer here, Cryptodamus, and I'm excited to be here today with one of my all-time favorite astrologers, the legendary Rick Levine, who I've known for many years. Thank you, Rick, for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
My pleasure.
Great to have you today. We're going to be talking about the Uranus-Saturn square. Rick Levine is one of the founders of one of the co-founders of Kepler College, which was really the first ever physical university for astrology in the United States. And I think they're all online now, but that was a monumental breakthrough in astrological education. So Rick, thank you for that. He's been practicing astrology for over 50 years, has written numerous yearly forecast books and forecast columns online. He's got various workshops and projects ongoing currently. So we're going to talk about the Uranus-Saturn squares because that is the big topic right now in astrology. We've got the fourth and final Uranus-Saturn square coming up here in the next couple weeks, October 1st through the 10th. It is going to be partile, meaning in the same degree. Saturn will be 18 degrees Aquarius, making a square 90-degree angle to Uranus at 18 degrees Taurus. It will not be technically exact, so that's another feature of this square that we'll talk about, but certainly the effect will be quite prominent. So first of all, I'm just going to give an overview of the history of the Saturn-Uranus square, at least going back to the initial conjunction, and that was in 1987, 1988. By the way, a year that we had the famous Black Monday stock market crash. And incidentally, Jupiter was also retrograde in Aries at that time as well. So this is another echo of what's going on in the financial markets right now. Jupiter is also retrograding in Aries as we have a Saturn-Uranus aspect. That led to then what we call the waxing square, the opening square, which took place in the year 2000. And obviously we had the dot-com crash of that year. And certainly there were many other things going on, but the Uranus-Saturn hard aspects are famous for sudden breakdowns, sudden unexpected collapses, economic crises, and also the end and crashing of speculative bubbles. This goes all the way back at least to the Dutch tulip mania of the 1630s. So this aspect has a lot of history for financial speculative manias, actually. Then that led to the opposition between Saturn and Uranus of 2008 through 2010. Of course, we all remember the great economic crisis of that period, the real estate bubble that almost brought down the entire financial system. So that leads us to where we are today. 2022, 2021, 2022, we've had an ongoing Uranus-Saturn square since February of 2021. And we saw speculative manias. Last year, we saw the meme stock craze, the Dogecoin and Shiba coin craze, the Wall Street bets, all of these stocks going crazy and then crashing, the cryptocurrency mania of 2021 with new all-time
NFTs.
Bitcoin. I'm sorry?
NFTs,
yes, of course. This was the modern tulips, actually. That's a great example of a speculative mania. Elon Musk moving the markets with tweets, right? All of this stuff is symptomatic of these kind of speculative manias. So that brings us to where we are today, and it's really sometime around, usually in the middle of that series, is when you start to get an economic crisis. I think in 2008, right? The first one was November 2008. So you actually got the collapse of the financial system at the beginning of the Saturn-Uranus square. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there were other factors because Pluto had just entered ingress into Capricorn. So it's always a complex, there's always a complex interplay of multiple factors. So Saturn represents stability, whereas Uranus represents dynamic, sudden, exciting changes, but also sudden, unexpected crises. So the symbolism of the Saturn-Uranus square can be sudden breakdowns, sudden dramatic changes in the status quo, sudden breakdown and collapse of markets, economic crisis, and the crashing of speculative bubbles, but also the death of Queen Elizabeth. Stability, someone who represented stability through turbulent times, unchanging stability through turbulent times. So we see this reflecting in kind of many different situations and circumstances. And in our personal lives, we may be having some dramatic personal changes as well. It also represents a conflict between the notion of freedom and stability. Also, that can oftentimes be a conflict between hanging on to tradition and conventional wisdom versus embracing change and innovation. So it's very deep. Has a lot of different symbolism on a lot of different levels. I'm just covering some of the really basic symbolisms of the hard aspects between Saturn and Uranus. And Rick Levine is gonna go a little deeper for us here and share some of his wisdom on this aspect series and the current upcoming fourth and final one that's coming in the next 2 weeks. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, although I do not disagree with you about the importance of these upcoming months, the third and final square was on Christmas Eve of last year of 2021. I hesitate to, even though it is a partile square, I hesitate to call this the fourth and final. There was a third and final, and this one is like an epilogue, but because it's not exact, although the cosmos will jump a gap when needed. Again, I'm not diminishing the importance on this, but I'm hung up a little bit on the languaging because I would not call this the fourth and final. I would call this the after effect. The third and final was last year, sure. But all of 2021, we've been living under the influence of this. And I think that you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm actually, just give me 1 second here. I want to, let me just line something up. I totally agree with you, actually, because, and if, a lot of my viewers are interested in financial astrology, we're not going to talk too much about that today, but I did want to just show you, something real quick here and show the viewers this, right. Let me just get my screen sharing set up here for a second. And I totally agree with you. And we saw the collapse of the stock market literally within a week or two of that final aspect, which was, as you said, right around Christmas. This is the S&P 500 daily chart. You can see the all-time high for the S&P 500 here was January 3rd, about a week after the last Saturn-Uranus square. So certainly within the orb of that aspect. And then basically you got that sudden collapse of the markets that is still going on today. We're breaking through a key support as we speak. So I totally agree with you, Rick. And you can even see this playing out with the markets, right? I mean, of course, there's going to be a give and take of plus or minus a week, a week or two here and there, but you can really see, and this is why I love financial astrology, because you can see mathematically how the numbers play out in the markets. That aspect crashed the system. So that was just what I wanted to add about that.
Right. So as far as, describing Saturn and Uranus, I love Rob Hand's description. When there's a Saturn, he used it to describe a Saturn-Uranus conjunction, but it's any interaction of Saturn and Uranus is basically an irrepressible force, that's Uranus, meeting an immovable object, that's Saturn. And that really works because what happens during the squares, conjunctions, oppositions, even the half squares and square and a halves, when these hard aspects are reached, what happens is that where the status quo has become too stagnant, where the stability has become so stable that it's beginning to lose the flexibility and be able to respond, what happens is that lightning strikes. And remember, in the human body, the animating force of the human body is lightning on a microcosmic level. It's electricity.
Electromagnetic.
And so the nervous, go ahead, sorry.
Electromagnetics, yeah.
Right, but it's electromagnetic. But ultimately, when Galvani, twitched the dead frog's leg, that was with an electrical current, and he demonstrated that the nervous system itself is conductive of electricity, as I would imagine any acupuncturist would also realize. But the thing that's important is that electricity is, unlike magnetism, electricity is sudden, it's on off, whereas magnetism is more of a field of influence, and there's this kind of invisible energy that kind of creeps up on you until it pulls you in. And Uranus doesn't work that way at all. Uranus works like lightning strike, and it's sudden.
Earthquake, yeah.
And it's absolutely proportional to the amount of overstructuring that Saturn has done. And that overstructuring can simply be based upon a fear of movement or a fear of the new, because I think another good dichotomy is to look at this last year and a half, almost 2 years, that we've been living under the influence of this square between Saturn and Uranus. Saturn is the old and Uranus is the new. You said that Saturn is stability or the status quo, and Uranus is the rebellion against that status quo. And when you look at what's going on in governments all around the world, certainly in the United States, we have this division between the old and the new, or the wanting to go back to the past. What I would remind viewers to consider that Freud called a symptom of neurosis called infantile regression, which means that when the going gets tough in the present moment, we recreate the past in our mind as better than it was, and we want to return to it. And this whole idea of making America great again, or of returning to the perfection of the past, it wasn't perfect, but that's in the mind what Saturn wants us to do, and Uranus won't let us do it. Uranus is going to keep firing those lightning bolts, and I know that you're focused on the financial aspect of this more than other things. My focus on this more than other things is the cultural aspect of the civil war that we have going on, not just in the United States, but around the planet. And the civil war is really interesting because there's no geographical dividing line. It's just basically a civil war between Saturn and Uranus. And unfortunately, it's not so civil, other than it's civil in as much as it's of the people.
Yeah, and that ties in also with the USA Pluto return, which the third one of that sequence is coming up.
As we may have talked about, I'm not convinced about that. This is a very interesting question because of the precession of the equinox, that although everyone is talking about the Pluto return, Pluto.
Oops, looks like we're having a little Mercury retrograde moment here. I think we lost Rick's signal. Let's see if he can get back.
There you are.
Yeah, we lost your signal there for a sec.
Okay.
Having a little Mercury retrograde moment here.
So yeah, the idea of the Pluto return in this is interesting because NASA tells us that Pluto takes 248 years to complete an orbit. 1776 plus 248 is not yet. It's a year and a half out into the future still.
I see what you're saying, right? Because because of precession of the equinox,
exactly,
the USA Pluto would actually be at a different position.
Couple degrees of.
But I don't want to get too much into that today because that's a whole separate.
All I'm saying is that I would want to minimize that Pluto return stuff because that still may be coming. That's all I'm
Okay,
suggesting.
well, yeah, from a financial standpoint, certainly in the Sibley chart, the Pluto is in the second house, and many astrologers have been talking about financial, financial implications of the USA Pluto return, among the many other levels that are happening with the Trump, the sort of the MAGA movement facing off and our democracy in this country. But again, that's a whole other subject. So we'll try to keep it, and we can do another show on this one, but let's try to stay focused on this next. So what do you see happening basically with this next Saturn Uranus square? And I'm just going to go to my astrology software, which I'm using the Luna software right now. And you can actually, this is a cloud software that you can use, lunaastrology.com. And if you use my name, Cryptodamus, you'll actually get a discount for signing up. This is a great astrology program. I just have it set to about October 2nd. And you can see we've got Saturn, I think, is at about 1856 Aquarius there. Uranus is at 1818 Taurus. That's about roughly as close as they're gonna get. I might be off by a few minutes here or there, but they're gonna be in that same degree of 18 degrees for about 10 days, October 1st through the 10th. So what do you see happening, when this aspect hits as its maximum application, and then in the aftermath of that over the next couple months?
A couple of things, because I spent my first few minutes kind of demoting this from an exact Saturn Uranus to a something else. Now I want to spend a couple of minutes saying why this may be more important than the previous three. It doesn't make it an exact square, though.
No, it doesn't. And I said that in the introduction, that this was not technically exact, and that is an important feature of this what I'm calling the fourth one in the series. It's not technically exact. And Rick, can you explain why that matters, what that means, and why that matters?
Well, the concept, just like an electrical circuit, when you're tuning, on a radio, when you're tuning for a radio station, when you get close to the exact frequency, you can hear it. But when you're nailed right onto the exact resonance, it comes in crystal clear. And in a way, all interactions between planets are like musical notes. They're like tuning. Yeah. And when they get close, it sounds okay. But when it gets exact, it sounds a lot better. Yeah. Or worse, depending upon whether it's
so energetically stronger when it's technically exact.
That is correct. And yet when they get within, within a degree or so, they're close enough that we're going to feel the energy.
We're feeling the music.
Exact. Say again?
We're feeling the music.
We're feeling the music. But when they're exact, the music is coming through so strongly, it doesn't even matter whether we have the radio on or not. It's going to come through in everything. And yet Pythagoras and Kepler both agreed that the planets are musical, that there's a music of the spheres, just because we can't hear it. It's so low frequency. But the thing is that when there are third and fourth and fifth notes in the mix, this can bring an energy into more focus. It's like if you hear two notes and they're almost in tune, and a third note comes in that's right in the middle of them frequency-wise, you might not notice that either note is out of tune, because somehow it makes the whole thing be more in tune or more exact. Now, you shared your screen a moment ago. Can I share my screen? Well, let me do that.
Yeah, hang on one second here. Let me, so to do that, I'm just going to make you the host here. And there you go. Okay, so now you should be able to do a screen share.
And, let's see. I think that will work.
But would you say that this is the culmination of this of this aspect series?
Well,
Or do you think the December one was the culmination?
well, technically the December was the culmination, but I think that sometimes the after statement can be more powerful. It's just like the warmest day of the year isn't the first day of summer when we have the most light. There's this lag of seasons that means that it takes time for reality to catch up. And reality does that. But in this case, when reality is catching up, there's something else that comes into the picture. Now we're looking at a chart where we have, like the chart that you showed, but mine doesn't have the complexity of houses on it. It's just what we call a natural wheel with the 12 signs of the zodiac around. And we can see that Saturn, and I have these things rounded off. So here it's still Saturn is 19. If we move this ahead a couple of days, that Saturn would back up to 18 the way you showed it. There's October 2nd, which is, I mean, any of these dates are okay to show. But I've simplified this so that there are no minutes, and that the only aspects that I have drawn in are to the planets that I want us to pay attention to. And you already pointed out that Saturn is square partile, meaning the same number, 18 and 18 degrees, fixed sign Aquarius to fixed sign Taurus, that square is pretty close, and it stays almost, it gets to almost a half a degree, about 36 minutes. So it's a little bit over a half a degree, like you say, from about now all the way through the first week of October. But the thing that most people don't realize is that the planet Jupiter, which is a heavyweight also, not as heavy cyclicity, cycle speaking, I don't know what the word is, cyclically speaking, because Jupiter is a 12-year cycle compared to Saturn's 29 and a half or Uranus's 84. But while these two planets are 90 degrees apart, within a half a degree, Jupiter, which is retrograding back through that point, which is a half of a square, 45 degrees to Saturn on one side and 45 degrees to Uranus on the other. Now, many astrologers just use the aspects by signs, which would mean that like a square is two planets that have two empty signs in between them, Saturn, then in Aquarius, Pisces and Aries empty, and then Uranus in Taurus. But it was Johannes Kepler who introduced the idea that there is a mathematical component to aspects, not just a zodiac component. And therefore, the 1/4 of a cycle, that's the square, 1/4 is a quarter, that half of that is 1/8. And that also is a sticky point that creates conflict and stress and reaction from the physical universe. And with Jupiter holding its position there, Jupiter, the planet of expansion, in many ways the opposite of Saturn, the planet of contraction. And remember, we had that great conjunction back in December of 2020 that astrologers were saying was the most
Well, we continue to have a little bit of technical difficulties here. Just bear with us. Hopefully Rick will get back on here. Again, folks, Mercury is retrograde right now, and it's badly combust today. It had Cazimi last night where it had superpower, but then it's separating from the sun today. So we are just continuing to have a technical glitch here.
Yeah, we have a glitch. We're back.
I was just explaining that Mercury is at maximum separating combustion and retrograde. So of course we're having some technical problems today. We just had the Cazimi late last night, and now we're back into the combustion. So okay. So this is almost like it's kind of almost it's like a minor T-square or something. It's like,
except the word minor, the word minor makes it less. and the higher the frequency, sometimes the
Well,
more important they
but I
are
mean,
when you're.
like a minor grand trine where you have like the two sextiles and the trine, right?
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah,
almost kind of like that.
yeah,
But by
yeah.
the way, if you didn't know, Rick Levine did actually an entire episode on these what most people refer to as minor aspects, although he takes issue with that, on the Chris Brennan show, the Astrology podcast. So go ahead and, if you're interested in what Rick is talking about with these non-traditional aspects, he did a whole great podcast episode, which I loved, by the way. And he goes into these, the quintiles, the septiles, the sesquiquadrates, the semi-squares, and these other aspects.
Right. I referred to them these days, and Chris really forced the issue for me because I refuse to call them minor. They're harmonic aspects, is what they really are.
Yeah. So
But
for you, they're just as powerful as any aspect, really.
a Jupiter half square Saturn
Yeah.
may be just as important as a Uranus square Saturn.
And why?
Because it's a higher frequency of the same resonance, and it becomes by itself, it might be important, but when it's feeding into this larger thing, it's like listening to someone play lead guitar of your favorite song, and then listening to an 88-piece orchestra behind it playing backup so that it really magnifies that. When you have these.
Yeah. So my take on Jupiter stressful hard aspects would be that they tend to exaggerate problems.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I think what we're going to see,
it's exaggerating the Saturn Uranus square.
Well, that too, but what we might also see is we might see that Jupiter overcompensating and false sense of confidence, which we know financially has created great disasters in the past.
Yeah.
But it's even more than that, because as Jupiter is making this half square or minor T square, if you want to call it that, during the same period of time, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun are one by one moving through the opposite point to Jupiter, which means that they're also making points that are square and a half or 135 degrees. 90 degrees is a square, a half of that is 45, 90 plus 45 is 135 degrees. And so if we back this up a day at a time and come back to the end, here we go, back here.
Yeah, right.
So we're going to see
all these oppositions to Jupiter, this series of oppositions to Jupiter is actually triggering the Saturn Uranus.
And what happens when a planet opposes Jupiter? Again, we get overconfident, we get overindulgent, we think everything is better than it is. Not that it can't be good, but Mae West said too much of a good thing is a good thing, but that may not be true. And so as we move this forward, and we had the equinox, then we have the sun on the 26th. And I have this set up. This is Solar Fire. I have it set up so that the lines get extremely fat as the orb or the difference approaches zero. In other words, as these aspects get close to exact, these lines get very, very thick. Very cool. You can see here that on the 26th, although the Saturn Uranus is not as close as it will get, the Saturn Uranus square, the fact that Jupiter is half square, both of them, and the sun is opposite Jupiter, which means it's a square and a half to both of them, this is extraordinarily destabilizing. Maybe more so than what will come later, but watch what happens when we move this a day at a time. Because, well, matter of fact, if we back that up another day, we have the new moon in Libra, very close to that destabilized position, already opposite Jupiter. Indeed. Then we have the sun moving into it exactly.
Indeed.
We also have Mercury. If we back this up quite a ways, let's just look at that Mercury. I'm going all the way back now to the new moon in Virgo back in late August. And Mercury has moved into Libra. And Mercury, as it's in Libra, is already making a square and a half to both sides of this, but it's not quite as exact yet. You can see there's other noise in it, but here's the Mercury not quite opposing Jupiter yet on August 30th, but already, even though these lines are thin, that Mercury is already coming into those square and a halves. So Mercury kind of was like the pioneer in all of this. Then Mercury turned retrograde, and then Mercury went back through those same points in mid-September. Again, opposing Jupiter, everything's going to be cool. We're working this out. It's not going to be as bad as we thought it was. And that continues, that Mercury, but here we have Mercury opposite Jupiter again on September 19th. These are all key dates that, if we look back, I believe will end up feeding what it is that we have coming, as now the sun and the moon move into that position.
Oh boy.
The moon moves away, the sun residually stays there. The sun begins to move away. Now, understand that the Saturn Uranus is still very, very close. And Jupiter, right around here, is making its exact half squares, even though it's moving very slowly. These last a long time. And then look what happens. Venus, the planet associated with money, comes into it on October 1st, exactly opposite Jupiter, and then forming that square and a half with Uranus and with Saturn. And actually, the whole thing isn't really quite done until that Mercury direct comes back through that same point. And you can see here. And so I believe
it looks like a yod. I mean, I know it's not, but it looks like.
No, well, actually, in the way I do harmonics or work with harmonic aspects, what we call a yod, which is 150 degrees and 150 degrees and 60 degrees. In other words, if the Saturn Uranus was a sextile 60 degrees, then each of these lines equidistantly would be a quincunx, or 5/12 of a circle, 150 degrees. I believe that whenever you have an isosceles triangle, it functions as a yod.
Now, Rick, this might be getting a little too technical for some of my viewers who are not professional astrologers. Can you tell us what this all means, really, for the bottom line for like people trying
to? Well, the bottom line is that when let's bring this back to just so that we can see it in its most dramatic. What this means is that we have this conflict of this maximum stress between the old and the new, the conservative and the progressive, the fearful holding on to the present and the past, and the blindly rushing into the future. These two things are at maximum stress. Into it, we have this magnifying lens that makes it even more, and yet these two are actually focusing their energy almost like a prism will focus the light off the narrowest part of the triangle. This apex, if you think of the Great Pyramids in Egypt, the point of the pyramids is the apex, and that's where the energy whooshes through or whooshes out. So you take all of this. Go ahead.
Who wins? The old guard or the revolutionary forces trying to push change?
Well, I think you've hit on the $64,000 question, and I would answer that if either Saturn or Uranus wins, then no one wins. We all lose. That the ideal situation here is a balance between the old and the new, so that the status quo isn't totally trashed, and so that progress isn't totally stopped. Now, ideally, this is theoretically the way a democracy of the middle path is supposed to work. Not saying that it is right now, because we have these extremes pulling on the extremities, and we don't see a middle path through, we see the extremities. The only way we will win in this is if we can find a balance point. And the good news here is that the apex, that the sun, Venus, and Mercury at the apex of this pyramid, if you will, is in the sign of balance. is in Libra.
Yes, and thankfully Venus at least is in domicile and has some dignity. Right now, Venus is in terrible shape because she's debilitated by sign in Virgo and approaching combustion to the sun, so invisible to the naked eye and in a weakened state. I think there's going to be at least a somewhat positive shift, although Venus will still be combust when she moves into her own sign in about a week from now.
That is correct.
Now, do you have any predictions given the current world events?
I lost you again. Mercury retrograde attacking.
Can you hear me, Rick? Hello? Rick? Oh man. I guess this serves me right for trying to do this video on Mercury retrograde and badly combust the sun. So I was going to ask Rick about predictions, given the state of the world right now. We're still seeing his screen here. I mean, we've got the war in the Ukraine. So if you've been following me on my Patreon group, on my Twitter account, which is Astro Crypto Guru, at Astro Crypto Guru on Twitter. My website also is astrocryptoreport.com. I've been warning about that we're really in very dangerous territory for the global financial markets. This could collapse at any time right now going into the square. Now, of course, we can't always predict markets. I'm not saying it's 100% certain, but it's a very, very dangerous situation right now. Rick, given the war in the Ukraine right now, the Trumpist forces, versus the anti-Trumpist forces trying to preserve the democracy, ostensibly Trumpist forces trying to take over the electoral process in some ways. Any other world events. Do you have any sort of predictions for what we should be looking for over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah. Wherever there's extreme, we should look at trying to mediate it. And that's difficult for me to say because, like many of your listeners, my views are probably just as extreme as theirs, whether we are on the same, path of perception or not. And yet, if we're going to look at the astrology again and again and again says mediate. You see, the more there's hidden, the more there's buried, the more that tension is stuck somewhere, even physically in the body, the more unconscious it is, the louder the lightning has to strike in order for it to get the attention that it needs so we can get the resolution or work toward the resolution. And so we are in a very dangerous state. Because of the massive level of denial, I would say, on both sides of the equation. And although, again, without going political, I am sure that my beliefs are right and yours, whoever you are, is wrong. But you're sure of the same thing. And so what that means is that there's no communication. And if there's no communication, there is ultimately suppression or repression, which is the fuel that feeds the power of the lightning strike of Uranus. There doesn't need to be a market crash, or there didn't need to be a real estate crash if that wasn't so stressfully bent out of shape already. Right. And so if we can get some movement, even if it's people are just all of a sudden get so scared, they realize we got to do something. And if in fact we can get some movement, it's very likely that we can get through this without the danger actually manifesting. And I think some of that will be either resolved, or at least if not resolved, at least de-attenuated or not on election day, which unfortunately is a little bit far away for the urgency of the immediacy. But we also need to remember that even though we're looking at this exact square, everything is contained in larger and other rhythms. And into this, we have this Mars retrograde already moving through its shadow. And so it may not be until after election day that we really have a sense of whether or not the dramatic change that we fear may actually manifest or not. That's my hit.
Well, the track record from a financial astrology standpoint is for market crashes, 1988, 2000, and 2008. So the previous three aspects have all produced a relatively dramatic market crash and an economic crisis. So the odds aren't good. It's very interesting, Rick, because I mean, if we go back to in terms of where we are in the economic cycles, if you go back to the 2008 to 2010 Uranus Saturn opposition, which was the
Hmm.
last hard aspect, that's when the
Hmm.
Fed started this policy called quantitative easing, which was essentially starting to buy assets, which they had never done before. Now that saved the Great Recession from becoming another Great Depression.
Right.
They kicked the can down the road, and they created a decade-long bull market that like we haven't seen. Now, under the pandemic, they did the same thing. They said, well, that worked, and so we're going to do it again. They doubled down on quantitative easing. They bought another $5 trillion in assets to backstop the economy. They prevented a collapse during the pandemic. Now, I'm not saying that was the wrong decision, but now the music is stopping in this game of monetary musical chairs. They're running out of options. They got behind on inflation. And now they have to restore their credibility. They have to keep raising interest rates. And now they're doing something called quantitative tightening, which is selling off that balance sheet, trying to reduce that balance sheet. So this all goes back to the 2008 aspect of the opposition and also Pluto's ingress into Capricorn. Now we're at the next Saturn Uranus hard aspect, and Pluto's about to leave Capricorn. So, and quantitative easing, which has been this kind of monetary fantasy, is at an end game. They may have a few more moves left, but they're approaching checkmate. And so and they're basically going to have to cause a recession in order to bring down inflation.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's where we are right now. So the odds of us not having a recession, some people say we're already in a recession, are not very good. And the implication for financial markets is another 10, 20, 30% move down. So it's a very dangerous situation. I think the odds are not very good that we avert an economic crisis. And I think the final USA Pluto return in December will also be a kind of a culmination of this economic crisis that we've been in with 40-year high inflation. Now, I know you've got some different thoughts on that, but we'll get into that another time. Any last thoughts on this before we wrap it up? I know you've got to go here in a few minutes. Any last thoughts on this? Whoops. I think Rick does not have a great, I think it's his internet connection. Mine seems to still be pretty solid, but Rick, are you there? Oh no, I think we lost him. Okay. I think we may have lost Rick Levine. Oh, that's too bad. Rick is on Twitter as Astro Merlin, I believe is his handle. And he has, I believe his website is stariq.com. So you can go ahead and check that. And it looks like we had a Uranus Saturn sudden collapse to the end of this YouTube video. I was going to ask him to tell us about his ongoing workshops and so forth. I just want to bring to your attention that I'm going to be having a workshop here that I wanted to let you guys know about. It's a Q4 seminar, financial astrology seminar. It's October 7th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. It's $95. And it's on my Twitter. It's my pinned post. So you can join that. We're going to be talking mainly about cryptocurrency markets, but also stock markets as well. So go ahead and check that out. I'm Cryptodamus is my name, and it's Astro Crypto Guru is my handle on Twitter. Please check my website, the Astro Crypto Report, where I have links to my Patreon group, my emails and my subscription services, my Patreon group, my educational courses, and also do personal consults and natal chart consultations. So go ahead and check that out at astrocryptoreport.com. Thank you, Rick Levine, for this great talk. Thanks for joining us today. I'm sorry we lost you right at the very end here, but hopefully you can come back on he can come back on the show again. I hope that was some really interesting information for you guys for Saturn Uranus, this upcoming square. And please like and subscribe my YouTube channel, the Cryptodamus Astro Crypto Report. And we'll catch you next time, guys. Good luck to everybody, and be safe out there. And we'll do another video soon. We're going to have some legendary astrologers like Ray Merriman coming on the show. My really good friend Gemini Brett is going to be coming on the show in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for some more great astrology programming, and we'll see you soon.